What's up guys, Chris VA Travels down here in Gloucester, Virginia, and going to take a tour of the Gloucester County Museum of History. And Museum Coordinator Robert Kelly is going to show me around. Alright, let's check it out.
Hello everybody, it's Robert Kelly with the Gloucester Museum of History here in Gloucester, Virginia, and I'm honored to welcome you to our humble museum. One of my favorite things about our institution is that we are housed within a 1770 tavern. The building on the exterior looks much like it would have looked in that time period, in the colonial days. We have exhibits that showcase the county history. We have exhibits about local watermen, commercial fishing industry, the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, famous and important African Americans from our community, women from our community. And we're working on a really big project to upgrade the exhibits in our second floor, our main gallery within the old historic Tavern Ballroom. Those exhibits will be open to the public come late summer 2025. So we're really excited about that expansion and the opportunity to tell new stories in a really fantastic space. But I'd love to invite you into the museum and share a few stories with you, show you a few highlights that may inspire you and encourage you to one day visit the Gloucester Museum of History in beautiful Gloucester County, Virginia. One of the first exhibits you'll encounter when you come inside the museum is dedicated to the life and legacy of T.C. Walker. Thomas Calhoun Walker was born enslaved here in Gloucester right at the beginning of the Civil War, and he goes on to become the first black lawyer in our community. In addition to this amazing feat, he helps to create schools for black kids, churches, and he also is a huge proponent of finding children who had been abandoned or orphaned homes. He helps to place over 2,000 kids in what nowadays we would consider foster homes. But in those days, we didn't really have that type of social programming, so he saves over 2,000 kids. It's an amazing story. It's an amazing legacy. He writes an autobiography later in life, and much of his story is captured in this autobiography called The Honey Pod Tree. This book is particularly fascinating because it speaks not only to Gloucester from the time of the Civil War all the way through the early Civil Rights Movement, but it also speaks to what's going on in Virginia and across America. So T.C. Walker is a really important figure in our community. In our exhibit tells the story of the scenes that are shown in the giant mural that is on Main Street. Back in 2020, the Cook Foundation, a local nonprofit, commissioned this beautiful mural, and there are different scenes from his life. And we kept getting questions here in the museum about what the mural was depicting or what the different stories were representing. So we created this exhibit to tell the story of each one of the images that are in the mural. So it's a really great way to kind of explore local public art and to learn a little bit about a local figure in our community. Really important person, T.C. Walker. In addition to African American history, we believe that we need to showcase stories from across our community. One important aspect of this county's history has been the commercial fishing industry, and particularly the watermen that worked the Chesapeake Bay and the York Rivers, fishing, crabbing, oystering. Huge part of the county's history, culture, and legacy, and it remains an important industry today in our county. The duck decoys behind me here were carved by William McKinley Smith. He was a local waterman who lived from 1897 to 1986. And he started carving these because he needed to support his very, very large family. He had 17 children, he and his wife, 13 of whom lived to maturity. And during the wintertime, when fishing wasn't going very well, he realized that duck hunting would be a way to help provide for his family. So he taught himself actually how to carve duck decoys. This is a great example. This collection is a great example of his work. They are on loan to us from a local lady who actually collected these over the years. And the special thing about these decoys are that we have one set of each type that he had carved. So until someone tells me otherwise, it's my belief that this is actually kind of a complete set of an example of his work. When we crafted this exhibit, we wanted to showcase, obviously, the art of carving decoys, but we also took the opportunity to share with our visitors a little bit about the migratory ducks that are found in this community, particularly during the wintertime. So each decoy pair, behind it, you can see images of what the actual duck looks like and learn a little bit about about that species. And I think this was particularly fun to do this because when you see the real thing and the decoy, you can really appreciate what an amazing artist William McKinley Smith truly was. So he was an amazing artist. And one of my favorite quotes that was provided to us by William McKinley Smith's granddaughter was a memory of her grandfather. And she says, "My favorite memories of my grandfather are of him painting decoys under the shade of his old pear tree. He had one station for fashioning the wood into ducks using a draw knife and a hatchet and a pocket knife. Then he would sand and paint them under the old pear tree. We had many good conversations under that tree." That's what this museum is all about, showcasing local history and bringing local voices into this space. Gloucester County was also home to a very important Revolutionary War battle known as the Battle of the Hook. This occurs on October 3rd, 1781. It becomes the largest cavalry battle of the entire American Revolution. Cavalry, this is men on horseback. The battle took place during the Yorktown campaign and featured Allied forces, both French and American, facing off against the British under the command of the infamous Lieutenant Colonel Bannister Tarleton. The battle occurred about halfway between Gloucester Courthouse, where we are located now, and Gloucester Point. The significance of the battle is that it was technically a Franco-American, an Allied victory. And the British, they do retreat back to the fortifications at Gloucester Point. During the Yorktown campaign, Cornwallis obviously had dug in at Yorktown, but he also sent a small detachment across the river to Gloucester Point. And this detachment at Gloucester Point, their instructions were to go out into the Gloucester countryside and forage for supplies, particularly for foodstuffs to feed the animals of the British Army that were besieged. George Washington understood this, and he understood how important it was to keep the British occupied and to keep them from gaining these supplies. So he sends both French and American troops into Gloucester with the idea of cutting off the British, not allowing them to forage into the Gloucester countryside. It all comes to a head on October 3rd, 1781, when the French and American contingent under another infamous commander, the Duc de Lauzon, they encounter Tarleton and a battle ensues. By the end of the battle, by the afternoon, Tarleton is wounded. He goes down on the field. His troops surround him. They do a retreat back to Gloucester Point, and the British never leave Gloucester Point again. Now, why does this battle matter? Well, first of all, it does stop the British foraging. After October 3rd, 1781, the British do not go back into Gloucester County for supplies. But number two, I think, and something that is often overlooked, is this French and American force in Gloucester. They now cut off any escape route to the north. Cornwallis had thought that just perhaps he could get his army across the York River into Gloucester and then break out to the north. Well, this battle and the French and American troops in Gloucester, it would really keep that from happening. So it is an important strategic victory. Why haven't we heard much about this battle? Well, there were very few casualties. There were 3 French soldiers that were killed the day of the battle. Several others died a few days later, but there were very, very limited casualties on either side. So that's one reason that I think the battle isn't very well known. The other, of course, is just 16 days later, October 19, 1781, you have a very important surrender, the surrender of the British at Yorktown. Exactly 1 hour later, on October 19, the British troops at Gloucester Point surrender. So here locally, we often will remind folks there was a second surrender ceremony at Gloucester Point 1 hour after the Battle of Yorktown. But we have here in the museum, we have several paintings, we have an exhibit, and also locally here, we have dedicated several historic markers at Abington Elementary School, the site of the actual battle, that tell this story and really bring it to life. The Gloucester Agricultural Industrial School. This is an amazing, amazing story and a recent exhibit that we have worked very hard to bring the memory of this school back into the light. This was one of the first high schools in Gloucester County for African American children. And it was a boarding school, meaning that the kids would travel there and spend the night. They would live at the school. Because of its location along the York River, these students came from not only Gloucester, but from Maryland, from Washington, D.C., and they were coming here to get to be trained so they could go on to college. The agricultural and industrial, those terms mean that these children were not only learning math and science and reading and English, but they're also learning agricultural trades. They're learning how to farm. They're learning how to use um, fertilizer. They're learning the science behind farming. Industry, they're learning carpentry, masonry, all types of tasks. What's interesting about looking at the curriculum from the 1890s and early 1900s, it's very much like what trade schools are doing today. And we even see a movement in our country now to kind of go back to not only learning reading and writing and math and science, but also learning trades. And that's exactly what this school was teaching in those days. There were two primary principals. The first principal was William Weaver, and then William Price and his wife Carrie, they took over. And the Prices really began to change the school and to develop the curriculum, kind of combining the two philosophies of Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois. The Prices were able to successfully kind of combine these methods. So the children were learning the classics, they were learning art and science and math, but they were also learning drama. They were being exposed to modern music, African American authors. And it really brings about foreign language, and it really brings about a well-rounded education for these students. The image here you see is of the campus in 1902. And I want you to notice how these are very large, very beautiful buildings. If you're familiar with the campus of Hampton Institute or Hampton University, they look much like the buildings of Hampton. This school was modeled after Hampton University, or at those days, Hampton Institute. So it's not too surprising that we even see similar architecture. In addition to the two main buildings, the two large buildings that house classrooms and dormitories, there were workshops, there were carpentry shops, masonry shops. There was 150 acres of farm fields. So again, these kids had a really wonderful opportunity to have a well-rounded education. Now, sadly, the school, by the time of the Depression, the school has closed very, very suddenly. Students that were having to pay tuition, their families could no longer afford to send them. Churches, for example, that were providing tuition assistance didn't have the resources, and the school suddenly closed. The campus sat vacant for many, many years. The buildings fell into disrepair. And when you drive down to where this school is located, in the Cappahozic section of Gloucester County, when you drive down there today, the only thing that's left is a historic marker. Now, about 3 years ago, it was brought to my attention that the original school bell still exists and was still in the county. And we were able to acquire on loan the original 309-pound bell cast in 1891 that was actually at the school. Now, a little story, I was a little bit hesitant at the beginning because as a museum professional, as a curator, I wanted to make sure that this was the actual bell from the school. So we reached out to the McShane Bell Foundry, which is still in business. They're no longer in Baltimore. They're now in Missouri. We reached out to the McShane Bell Foundry and we showed them pictures. We talked to them about the bell, and they confirmed that the only bell that weighed 309 pounds that was cast in 1891 was indeed sent to this school. It was sent by boat. It arrived at Cappahozic Wharf, and it was installed at the school. So when you're doing research about objects, it's always very exciting to confirm the stories. So we're blessed to have the bell. The people that have loaned it to us are okay with people touching it. So I always encourage our guests to tap the bell, to hear that sound, because this object is something that every visitor to campus, every student would certainly identify with. So it's a really great object. In addition to the bell, we have some ledgers from the school. We actually have a diploma that's in our collection. The diploma belongs to Nathaniel Thomas Jones. He was a graduate who went on to become a very well-known pastor here in the community. So we have some really cool objects, archival objects that again help tell the story. But the Gloucester Agricultural Industrial School, it's a wonderful, wonderful story that we are really honored to showcase some really cool objects from. The Gloucester Museum of History, we love to showcase our local history. And one of our recent exhibits that was put together by an intern here at the museum, who's now our museum specialist, Sydney Ripley, she decided that we should really focus on telling the story of Gloucester's country stores. So this exhibit has some really cool objects that were found here in the different country stores that are in Gloucester. We have some great images of what these stores would have looked like. The really neat thing about the country store stories that several of these stores still exist. For example, Nuttall's store is still very active in the community. There were over 50 of these stores in the early 1900s. This is before the days of the Walmarts and the Targets, and this is how people locally would have shopped. Each community in Gloucester would have had its own store. So these would have been very, very important places for commerce, but also for tying a community together and making connections. The country store was the place in the early 1900s and in the mid 20th century where people would come to visit each other, where they'd come to discuss the weather, where they'd come to discuss, what crops are growing well and how their animals are doing. And it was also a place where folks could maybe catch the news or a sporting event on the radio. This is a really neat radio from the 1930s. It actually came from a local country store. So when we think of these stores, we think of them as an important, commercial piece to our community, but they also really kind of tied the community together. This is where people would come on weekends to gather. In addition to the objects and the images we have, we also pulled out some really great archival pieces. We have some store ledgers. We have actually quite a few store ledgers from the different stores that are in our community. These two ledgers are from the store that was known as Roan's store. These are from the early 1900s. And it's a lot of fun to look at the ledgers because you can learn a lot about, people's social status. You can learn a lot about what people are buying. You can learn whether they are wealthy or whether they are a farmer by looking at what they're purchasing. The other interesting things that the ledgers show us is that wealthy folks could often pay with cash. Well, we see that people are also trading and bartering. So we have some individuals that pay with cash each month, no problem. We have other people that are bringing in eggs or hens or butter to pay their tab. So it's really cool to kind of analyze the ledgers and these primary sources to understand what was going on in the early 1900s and what people were buying and to understand the importance of these country stores. And as I mentioned earlier, there are several that you can still visit. So it's a really great way for our museum visitors to understand the history, but then they can actually go out into the community and visit a country store. The Gloucester Museum of History is housed within a tavern that was built in 1770. When people ask me, particularly students ask me what my favorite object is, I tell them the building. Because as you can see, it's a lovely, lovely building. The image you see on the screen is one of the earliest photographs of the building. This is from about 1870. It's one of the first that we have. And you can see, aside from the second floor porch that's no longer there, the building on the exterior looks much like it does today. It was a tavern. This was a place where people gathered. It's a place where people would come to spend the night, to eat, drink, to meet. I'm sure in the second floor ballroom, which we will visit here shortly, I'm sure there were musical concerts up there, and I'm sure there was gambling and card playing. Taverns were key to a small community like Gloucester. Over the years, the tavern expanded, and then by the 1920s, it actually became known as the Body Top Hotel. And as you can see, there was a large addition put on the right side or the southern side of the building, and this is where your more traditional, more modern hotel rooms would have been located. Again, this would have been the place to be in Gloucester. Right next door to the courthouse, just steps away from the center of government. And you can see in the images that the court circle, again, which is right next door, was always very, very busy. So this tavern would have seen lots and lots of business. So it's a wonderful building that has been preserved over the years. It operated as a hotel through the 1950s. It was purchased by Gloucester County in the 1960s. And then for about 30 years, from 1970 till about 2000, it served the county as office space for departments such as the Treasurer's Office. The Board of Supervisors met in this building in the 1970s and 80s. And then in 2000, it became the museum, and it's been the museum for the last 25 years. We also have a case here where we have a handful of objects from the hotel. Most of the objects in this case are from the early 1900s. We have several sets of china. We have tablecloth and napkins, a key, a spittoon that would have been used in the tavern for folks that might enjoy chewing tobacco, for example. But these are objects that have been collected over the years that are actually from the Boditat hotel. I think the china is particularly beautiful, and again, it's from the early 1900s. But this building has served the community for over 250 years, and it remains an important community gathering space now as a museum. So again, we are really honored to preserve this building and to welcome the public to the old Tavern or Boditat Hotel. Well, now we've made our way upstairs to the museum's second floor. This was historically known as the Tavern Ballroom. This is my favorite part of the museum because this is where you can really see the 1770 tavern in all of its glory. You can see the original 250-year-old wide plank pine flooring. It's just beautiful. If you imagine the things that this floor and that this space has seen. There's a lot of original trim work around the perimeter of the room. We have a lot of original plaster. If you look around the perimeter of the room, also we have these pegs that allowed visitors to the tavern to hang their saddlebags or their belongings or their coats. In 1770, it was a 3-mile-an-hour world, so people are traveling here by foot or by horse. And in the wintertime, on a cold day like today, they're going to be wearing jackets and coats, and you need a great place to hang those things. I think of this space as kind of the all-purpose room of the tavern. This is where all the stuff would have happened. Again, food would have been served, drinks would have been served. People would have held meetings here, dances, balls. Colonial Virginians loved to dance, music, gambling, card playing, all those things that we think of. This could also have been a place that folks could have rented for a special event or for a party. So again, the fact that we have the ballroom intact, much like it would have looked in the 1770s, is really significant to me. This space, I'm particularly excited to share that we have recently received a grant, and we are in the process of updating the exhibits. By September 1st, 2025, we will have all new exhibits up here. We'll be telling different stories, trying to tell more stories. So again, there's a lot of exciting things upcoming here at the Gloucester Museum of History. But again, this ballroom is certainly not to be missed. We currently have a traveling exhibit on display on loan to us from the American Friends of Lafayette. So that's something that's interesting that folks can check out. This year, the American Friends of Lafayette is commemorating the bicentennial of Lafayette's return to America as guest of the nation. In 1824, he was invited to come back by President Monroe, and he ends up spending 13 months in the United States. He travels to all 24 states that were in the Union at the time. And everywhere he goes, he's greeted as a hero. So the American Friends of Lafayette, they've created this traveling exhibit, but they're also following in his footsteps, creating educational programs and events at the actual location on the actual date where Lafayette was 200 years ago. The bicentennial started in August 2024 in New York and will continue through September of 2025 when Lafayette finally departs Washington, D.C. and heads back to France. This exhibit, called The Life and Legacy of General Lafayette, celebrates his full legacy. Of course, he was a military general who volunteered to serve in the Continental Army at age 19 in 1777. He was with Washington at Valley Forge. He led American troops at Yorktown. But a lot of folks don't know about his post-war legacy. He always fought for liberty and freedom. He was an abolitionist. He supported women's rights, women's authors, religious freedom, religious tolerance. It was very important to the American Friends of Lafayette to commemorate and to share his full legacy. So this exhibit, we're grateful to have this on display because it speaks to his full legacy and his involvement in our American Revolution. The other piece of his story that is often overlooked is his involvement in having the French come in support of the Americans, this Treaty of Alliance. France becomes the first country to formally recognize the United States of America. And again, a lot of that, we have Lafayette to thank for a lot of that important work in those days. But check it out while you're here. This exhibit will be on display through the summertime here in the summer of 2025. So if you're interested in General Lafayette or the American Friends of Lafayette, definitely check it out. Thank you for spending a little time with us here at the Gloucester Museum of History. We're open Monday through Saturday, 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. And we can also open by appointment. So just give us a call, look us up on the internet. We have a website. We fall under Gloucester County Government. We're part of the Gloucester County Parks, Recreation, and Tourism. And we're located right on Main Street, very conveniently located on Main Street in Gloucester Courthouse, just a stone's throw from many other historic sites, shops, restaurants. We have plenty of free parking. Admission to the museum is free, and we're always happy to welcome our visitors. Thank you for taking time to join us today, and I hope to see you in Gloucester soon.